This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Asana, the revolutionary platform to manage all your projects more easily and effectively. For your free 30-day trial, visit asana.com/BeanCast today. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Episode 530. Belichick Scares Children. Monday, February 4th, 2019. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob North. Thanks for joining us. GDPR was in the news again last week, but it was good for a change. One publisher actually found that the regulation's harsh discipline has led to new approaches that are both more effective and more ethical. How else is GDPR benefiting us? We'll discuss. Also, the impact of a judicial ruling over biometric privacy, the NFL's endorsement deal boot camp, some fascinating game day stats, plus this week's AdFail 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the General Manager of VidCon, Mr. Jim Louderback. Hi, Jim.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to be back.
Glad that you can make it. Now, next up, we welcome the Chief Innovation Strategist for Blue State Digital, Mr. Samir Patel. Hi, Samir.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And finally, we have the President and Chief Creative Officer at Allscope, as well as board member of Mashburn Enterprises, Mr. Jonathan Sackett. Hi, Jonathan.
Coming to you straight from the heart of the polar vortex, Jonathan Sackett.
Literally the heart of it, Chicago.
Chicago's a lot of fun, let me tell you.
Well, let's jump into not weather-related news. First up on the story rundown, they say that necessity is the mother of invention, and certainly GDPR has been a poignant source of necessity for the marketing world. It's pretty much upended everything that we're doing for quite a while now. So it's not surprising that long-lingering projects to improve targeting tools and lift the quality and usability of first-party data have suddenly taken off with what is, maybe not surprisingly, a lot of exceptional results. For instance, UK publisher Immediate Media has seen, or at least they report they've seen, a 135% increase in digital ad revenue, even after halting reliance on third-party data just by enhancing their first-party data stream. Jonathan, all these stories, they're pretty exciting, but is this truly revolutionary stuff happening, or is it more about a long overdue cleaning of house and just doing the things that we knew we should have been doing all along but didn't because we were over-relying on cookies and other third-party data?
Yeah, I think it's both, to be honest. I think, first of all, does everybody know what the GDPR is, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe? It's supposed to protect Europeans' personal data, right? And, first of all, I never trust people reporting their own results. I mean, I would say I have a healthy sense of skepticism. So 135% increase, it seems like a big duh to me, because that's like saying, well, I'm an insurance salesman and I've got a room full of family and friends. I'm going to try to sell them versus going outside, walking down the street and trying to sell it to somebody.
There's also the fact that 135% increase doesn't tell you where they were to begin with. So 135%.
Exactly. What's the starting point of 135?
Right,
exactly.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I think, first of all, I think it's a great idea, Bob. You of all people, you got your start in direct response. Cleaning out your own data, governing your own data, and keeping it clean is always a good idea. I mean, let's face it. Versus, third party data, third party cookies, third party assets, and triggering mechanisms are never going to be as strong as your own in-house capabilities if you're cleaning your own data sets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and from a standpoint of the agency world, Samir, having access to your own data and being able to showcase what kind of customer is coming to your site, what kind of user is there, and that's going to benefit the agencies or the ad buyers, right? I mean, if you're in the market for advertising, you want to make sure that you understand everything about the people you're reaching, and first-party data is so much richer than third-party data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that's the kind of holy grail for marketers, is being able to kind of attribute, everything across all channels for the people you're engaging with. I think the interesting thing to think about is also, what you're really measuring here, because ultimately that's what the data is in service of. And so, if we move away from something that is more purely about big awareness advertising and start thinking about things like, engagement and building relationships and so forth, I think that first party data becomes incredibly important.
Just to that point, this information is a little bit dated, but one of our clients in the past, who I won't mention, we were cleaning out their data sets for them to be able to better trigger to their existing customers, et cetera, basic 101 stuff. And we found up to 16 credit cards per user because the data hadn't been cleaned in that long.
Oh,
And
wow.
I mean, if you're going through the data and you're finding that messed up of information, then you have no choice but to go to third party, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's just like if your first party data is not doing the heavy lifting, the third party data, at least it's, you would assume, is more updated and more current because it's coming from actual activity online, especially when you're talking about cookie data.
Exactly.
It's more updated, but it's certainly not giving you the kind of identifiable, information, individual information, and the nuances that a good, solid, clean customer data set is going to always give you. Getting back to this thought, though, Jim, about the fact that we GDPR is forcing us to do these types of things, or at least it's forcing a lot of people who are doing business in the European Union to do these things. The idea that it's something that we should all be doing all along seems like that's the real story here. This is not about GDPR. This is about we've been really lax in the way that we've treated data, and we need to get back to basics. Are you seeing a lot of people starting to look at their first-party data in a little bit different light because of GDPR, and now starting to get back to basics and cleaning up their data sets so that they're more functional and more sellable?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think we got addicted to easy data, right? And it's there, it's right there, it's easy to get, and it may not have been the best data, but it path to least resistance, just take it in and make decisions on it. And so I think the GDPR is definitely pushing people to say, look, let's go back to quality. Let's go back to things that really matter and things we can really use to help drive decisions and drive the right decisions. So yeah, it's even if you're not doing business in Europe, GDPR seems like at least elements of it will be coming to the US and around the world. So, certainly now's the time to start looking at it and saying, hey, how about we have the best data rather than the easiest data?
Yeah.
Easy Data, wasn't that a song by Phil Bailey and Phil Collins?
I don't think so, but it should have been.
That was Easy Lover, I'm just kidding.
Should have been.
I'm living on Easy Data Street. I love it.
He was a rapper with straight out of Compton, I think. So.
Well, something Jim mentioned here, Jonathan, about regulation coming to the States. This is something that we've covered in the last few episodes of the show. We've talked a lot about the coming wave of data privacy regulation that's probably going to hit the United States. How much liability are companies holding by not getting ahead of this curve, considering that the U.S. regulations, if they come through, at least some of the proposed ones, may be even harsher than GDPR?
Yeah, if they do come through, or if and or when, I think, first of all, this is my humble opinion, it's the general data protection, right? I would rather see it as the global data protection. I know that sounds like one world order or something, but if you could get some sort of a global governance over this, because it would govern everything from cookies to secure sockets layer to dual encryption in and out. Basically, it's protecting. All you have to do is ask the people who got caught with their pants down, like Target, for example. Then they would, of course, say it's a good idea. The problem that there's two problems that I can foresee. One is the state versus the federal, right? So how is that going to get governed? And number two is how, basically, how much governance they can actually do over the internet, because there's so many ins and outs to this. Remember, you couldn't online gambling was outlawed, so they put it offshore. Basically, this is the race between the bullet and the bulletproof vest. As soon as they come up with a governance, you got to find a way around it, right? And when you find a way
Well,
around it,
not necessarily. I mean, it's just like finding a way around it may not be the
well,
solution.
finding a way around it means
No,
that,
the way to
that
comply to the way to there may be a better solution, which is how do you comply with this and actually improve your operations. It's not about
Well,
getting around it.
that's
It's about
that's exactly where I'm going with this, because what happens is the reason why people, in my opinion, the reason why our clients and our partners over time have failed at this is because cost effectiveness. If you have to hire somebody from a tech standpoint, from a hardware, from a software, and from a general marketing advertising perspective, it's overhead. And it gets expensive. That's why it's so much cheaper to go to third party, but you're still not going to get the good results. So what you have to do as a CEO or CMO or CIO is balance those things out to say it's a teeter-totter. You have to say, okay, well, this is our cost of having these people in-house or consultants versus the third party, but here's the results we anticipate on getting if we do it right in-house.
I think what you communicated is a basic misconception that I believe a lot of businesses have, which is that the third-party data is going to be cheaper than doing all the hard work of making your own data cleaner. But there's an upfront cost in cleaning up your first-party data, Samir. I mean, there's an upfront cost, but the long-term results are that you have to market less to better targets with better results. So the end result is you make more money for spending less money overall. Isn't that the reality of this? I mean, you've lived under GDPR now. I mean, it's just like you're based in London. So what's your experience with that? Is that the case, or am I wrong?
No, I mean, I think there's some truth in that, and I think just one thing to mention also is GDPR may be, applied to Europe, but any U.S. company, and especially companies with large web presences who are targeting and dealing with people in the European Union have to GDPR applies. So this is an important issue for here. But yeah, I agree. If this is a reason to be smarter and more efficient with data, and also use data to create relationships that are more meaningful, then that can only be a good thing.
Although I see some paranoia out there. I mean, I look at companies based in the U.S. working around the world who are just dialing back so much on what they do and putting things in place so they don't run afoul of the law that it actually can get tough to really even do things that are legit marketing with data. So I worry that GDPR is great, don't get me wrong, and I love that we're protecting consumers' privacy. I think we should be doing more of it. I think the government's going to get involved. I think that there's plus and minuses. But I do think we can swing too far on the other side of being too careful because we're trying to just not do the wrong thing.
It is. You got to remember, from a legal standpoint, if you have it sourced to a third party, then their butt is on the line. Now, conversely, it's also garbage in, garbage out. You're only as good as the people that you've hired to govern your own data and encryption. So again, you can say, yeah, you're better off with your own data. Totally agree with that 100%. But you're only as good as the people that you've got in-house handling it, and you've accepted that liability.
Is that entirely true that you're off the hook if you're using third-party data? Because I thought the marketer themselves, whether they're using third-party or first-party data, is still on the hook for the regulation.
No, not with the legal agreements that I've had to review and sign. And besides that, if I said it, I'm probably right. But
I think we're done here.
And I'm out. Tip your waitress, folks.
Well, I'd love to get Samir's opinion, though, before we wrap up on this topic about advice that you're giving to your clients. Obviously, you're right, absolutely, and we know this, that GDPR affects all companies, but there's a certain aspect of working within the European Union at this particular juncture that makes it so that you're maybe a little bit more aware, maybe a little bit more forward thinking in terms of the way that you're handling the GDPR. What kind of advice would you give to U.S. companies, especially in light of the fact that GDPR-like regulations may be coming to the States?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we talk about really comes down to transparency. There are certain amounts of things that you have to have in place, and, you have to be able to provide someone their data if they ask for it. You have to be able to remove it. You have to have a kind of data protection officer. So there's some hygiene that has to be done, but ultimately, this is about people knowing how their data is going to be used, and also giving them, an opportunity to have that removed. I think that one thing to think about for GDPR is, this is kind of in its infancy. A lot of the regulations around GDPR are very inelegant solutions, especially for the consumer who is dealing now with, every website you go to, you have to, give consent, and gives consent for multiple things on multiple channels, depending upon the marketing purpose. So, this ties into a bigger conversation around the value of our data as individuals, and becoming aware of that and starting to think about how it's going to be used. So, I think that we're in the early days of this, and this is something that's put into place as a bit of a fix. But this certainly, I don't think is going to be anyone's idea of a long-term solution. But, it's starting the protection conversation, which is good.
Yeah, I think that's great advice to at least start the conversation. Start to look at your data sets and start to figure out what we're going to do when this happens. Well, we're going to talk next about some more privacy regulation. The Illinois Biometric the Information Privacy Act. There was a ruling about it, and it's kind of problematic for some marketers. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about Asana, our sponsor for this evening. And look, I've worked with a lot of companies. I mean, I'm a consultant, so I've worked with a lot of startups. I've worked with big companies. I've worked with small companies. And I've always had to adopt whatever project management platform they were currently using. And let me tell you, there are a lot of really dodgy project management platforms out there. Not everything is created the same. You need to find something that's easy to use. You need to find something that is effective and something that's easy to adopt by a large number of your employees. And a lot of the platforms out there don't do it, but Asana does. And I was first introduced to Asana when I was working with a startup called 16 Zeros. They put together an Asana task list for me to get the project done. And I was blown away at how easy it was to go through my tasks, to quickly find all the resources and information I needed associated with that task, to communicate with the partners at the company so that they knew exactly where I was at on the task. And then I started to adopt it to use it for projects outside of that experience. I started to use it to, manage website development projects and brand voice projects. And I found it so easy to set up tasks, to see where people were at any given time, because the management platform was just one of the best I've ever seen. It gives me the opportunity to see where everybody is and whether they've completed their task, whether they have questions about the task, whether they have resources that are necessary. And let me tell you, this is invaluable when you're managing a large, complex project, to have this kind of information at your fingertips quickly. because duplicated effort is one of the worst factors when you're dealing with a large-scale project. And this helps to eliminate the duplication of effort with simple, elegant design. And I know I've been talking about this product for a few weeks now, and I know I gush a lot about the apps, but the apps are really what sold me on this. A lot of the apps I've played with on other platforms tend to be just glorified web browsers, but this one is a native iOS app. It works well on the iPad. It works well on the iPhone. They've got Android platforms as well. They're doing fantastic apps on that platform. And it just makes it so simple to stay in touch with my project on any device that I'm at any given time. And I'm not alone in my praise of this system. I mean, Asana is used by Overstock to manage their partner relationships. And you got to imagine a company like Overstock has thousands and thousands of partner relationships that they need to manage. They trust Asana to keep everybody on point and make sure that all the tasks are being completed in a timely fashion. More than 1 million organizations in 195 countries across the world use Asana, and they're reporting some amazing statistics, like 45% more productivity within the organization because they use Asana, or 80% of customers saying that Asana increases team accountability, or even 74% of customers say Asana helps their teams hit their deadlines more effectively. I want you to give this a try. I want you to just take a chance. Go to this website and get a free 30-day trial, because your marketing team can benefit from this immediately. It'll allow you to turn your work into the kind of productivity that, the productivity and results that grow business. And I want you to try Asana free for 30 days. Get started at asana.com/BeanCast. That's asana.com/BeanCast. Even if you're not immediately in the market for a project management platform, I promise you that it's totally worth your effort and time to take advantage of this offer and try it out now, because we all know we end up needing it eventually. So you might as well find out now what Asana can do for you. That's Asana, asana.com/BeanCast. Asana, it's what I use. I think you're going to love it as much as I love it, and we thank them very much for their support of the show. Well, an appeals judge sided with a mother seeking damages against Six Flags under the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act for collecting her son's fingerprint during a park visit. What makes this so important to us is that the judge ruled that the plaintiff didn't need to prove harm and that the invasion itself was cause for damages. Now, that's obviously something that we need to consider, but Samir, not every marketer collects biometric data, but for the increasing number who do, why is this ruling particularly concerning, and how does it impact the way that we treat the privacy of biometric information in the collection efforts that we're doing in our marketing programs?
So, that question is really interesting to me in the context of our discussion about GDPR a few minutes ago, because in that question, you're presupposing that this is something that's concerning to marketers. What's interesting to me, because I live in Europe, well, I live in London, so for the moment we're in Europe, is that, because we're so used to things under GDPR, when I heard about this act and this kind of this lawsuit, the main thing I thought of is, yes, of course this is a problem, but for the individual, not for the company. Because the individual didn't clearly give consent. And I do think maybe consent is ingrained into me from, working under GDPR. But I do think that's important if we want to be good and ethical marketers. And so, the law in Illinois says you must get consent. And in this case, Six Flags, there was a very easy thing they could have done, was get written consent when they took the fingerprint scan. And so I do think this bleeds over into other data, and it's part of a broader conversation, and again, about personal data and its value. But again, it comes back to transparency. It's like, just let people know what you're using it for. So yeah, I kind of saw this from a little bit of a different angle. It seemed a little bit more straightforward to me.
It's again, it's just like, it makes sense to what you're saying. I mean, from a standpoint of privacy, we need to put in place simple methods for collecting a permission before we start collecting data. I think that's that's a legitimate concern. But the idea that damages were created when there was no harm proven, it's just like the data was collected, but no harm was shown from the collection of that data, makes this particularly concerning from a marketing standpoint, because we're collecting data all the time, right, Jonathan? I mean, we're collecting data everywhere we go. And if the user doesn't need to show that this data was used incorrectly, that makes it so that the privacy of the individual could potentially be disrupted or violated just by the collection of the data itself, which is, especially problematic given the fact that we're facing a GDPR-like legislation coming forward very soon.
Right. I don't want to take this too far down the road, but what we're talking about is the potential for a problem. I mean, where does that go with gun control? I know that's taking it way too far, but it does set a precedent for potential danger or potential problems or potential in breach of data. And I think that's a dangerous place to play, because just because listen, people will willingly give up all of their information, their pictures, their family and their friends on Facebook, and until it comes back to sting them, do they realize it? That makes sense to me, because, well, you still gave it up freely, and yes, you didn't read the privacy agreement, but when it comes down to the potential of a problem, if you can get monetary damages on the potential of a problem, then we're opening up a Pandora's box here.
Yeah, and I mean, to go back to what Samir is saying, because I agree with you, Samir, it would be so easy for them to implement some kind of permission to collect the data, and that the law requires them to get that kind of permission before they collect the data. But to say that damages should be awarded as a result of this takes that a little bit to an extreme, doesn't it? I mean, it's just like it's one thing to be fined by the government. It's another one to have a civil lawsuit say that you owe me money because you violated this law, even though no harm was shown in the violation of the law.
Yeah, but the reason I mentioned the consent is that if that was done, we wouldn't have gotten to this point.
Yeah.
And I think the issue around proving harm has more to do with how this Privacy Act is written than anything else. And so, ultimately, that's kind of why I'm saying that there's just some hygiene here. Six Flags should have gotten the information from the beginning, and then it just wouldn't have been an issue. So yeah, I understand the point around, you can't just sort of prove harm without doing anything. But again, I think that actually just could have been avoided in this case.
Yeah, it would have been so simple if they had just done that. Jim, what's your thoughts on this ruling? Does it signal the end of data collection, of biometric data collection, as being too problematic? Or is it, as Samir has suggested, that the easy thing to do is just get permission and then you're free and clear of this type of regulation?
Well, I have two thoughts on this. One is that this is really, when we look back at 2019, we're going to look back at the government leaning in across many different ways on the privacy issues. And we all know that the folks that are making the laws in government aren't necessarily as up on tech trends and tech concepts and technology in general. And so they are going to make a lot of mistakes. And I think that the way that this is written is definitely full of mistakes. And you bring it up on the side of whether there should be damages or not. But I want to go back to, why did Six Flags collect this data? And I run an events company. We produce events for kids on the B2B side. And we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, how do we uniquely identify somebody that buys a ticket, and in our case, somebody who buys a weekend pass, so they don't then share that with somebody else, so that you don't end up with 3 people using one ticket. How do we make it so that and if you've ever waited for a line to get into a baseball game or Disney World or somewhere else where, you've got to go through all these different hoops to figure out who you are. And we now use RFID, and you've got to have RFID scanners. We all work hard to make sure that we can make those things go away, because we want to make the experience be as good as possible for the people that come to those events, and waiting in line is a bad experience. So every time another law like this that is imperfectly formed, designed to make it harder to identify somebody who all they want to do is buy a ticket and get into the frickin' Six Flags or VidCon or something like that, it tends to shut pieces of our business down. So the government needs to understand what they're doing, and I don't think they're going to. And I think we're going to see a lot of government fails on privacy this year. But I think also you got to dial back to say, what was the company trying to accomplish? and how do we make it so that they can accomplish that, which is better for everybody.
No, hey, listen, I think that's a great point. My question to you then, just because you're the expert here on this, is that don't you think that somebody at Six Flags probably said, look, we can have them take a picture, have an ID card, we can print it out and laminate it for them and everything else, and somebody said, no, it's going to be more cost effective to do it this way with the fingerprint? I think it was a money-saving thing, right?
Actually, I think it was, and I didn't dive into the story enough, and I'm not sure if the data is out there, but I'm assuming that this was for a summer pass or an annual pass.
I'm assuming too, yeah.
Right? So it's somebody who says, look, I'm going to get an annual pass, and they, take a picture of themselves. I'm sure their picture is on the pass, but they want to make sure that they have another level of security. So when George hands that pass to Bobby,
right,
and Bobby looks like George because, they're related or it's his cousin or something. And he goes, they want to make sure that that's not happening. And you've got to have another layer where it's like, well, you sort of look like the picture, but, maybe it was taken a year ago and you went through puberty and now maybe we ought to see if it's really you. And
I
so
get
there's
that
just,
all the time, by the way. I get
yeah, I'm sorry. But that's kind of where I think this came from. And yeah, I do think that Six Flags should have just gotten consent and that would have solved the problem.
Yeah.
But I also think that the government is going to be leaning into this privacy issue so much this year that we're going to see more things that are even worse than this start to happen.
Sure.
Well,
so
that's...
we agree again that I'm right?
Yes,
of course.
We always agree with you, Jonathan. Hey, that's a really great point, Jim, and it's something that we need to consider here because it's like I said at the very outset. This is not just about biometric data. This is a precedent about privacy and whether privacy invasions constitute real damages, real harm to the individual, even if no harm can be shown. And that's the precedent that's being revealed here. And if that's the case, that puts an incredible pressure on us when we're dealing with any kind of data, doesn't it? I mean, Samir, any thoughts?
Yeah, and totally take that point. And that is very problematic. And, that's why I keep coming back to, this is a much bigger issue around the value of our data, the use of our data, and people wising up to that. And that's also why I think, 5 years from now, this conversation will be very different because things like this are going to happen and there's going to be some, some problems around it before we really start to think of more elegant solutions for this. So I still think we're in the world of very inelegant solutions. So what was just described about the reason to take fingerprints, surely there's some other way of ensuring that we know who someone is. If we think about, in our world, we also work in, politics, nonprofits, and so forth. But if you think about elections and, especially elections in other countries around the world, they're having a huge problem in actually saying, the person that voted is actually who they said they were. And so I think when you start getting into those kinds of implications, then, the potential that just having someone's data can cause harm without, any other reason is hugely problematic.
All right, from now on, everybody that comes to VidCon, as soon as they go in the first time, has to dip their finger in a pot of purple ink. Then I'll know who they are. I love that.
And then they get a blood test.
Yeah, and then they get a blood test. My God. That would be terrible. Well, moving on, the NFL has always been a grab bag of endorsement deal possibilities. You've got so many players, each with their individual identities, and all these opportunities for endorsement deals are constantly being played around when we're talking about marketing opportunities. But up until now, players have been on their own for creating their online personas and personal brands. Now the league is stepping in to teach players how to make themselves more appealing to brands. They've started a boot camp of sorts, and they've brought in experts on all kinds of things from social media to how you portray yourself in interviews. So, Jim, will this create real value for advertisers, or is this just lipstick on a pig skin?
Good Super Bowl story. I think, look, in abstract, this is not a bad thing. We can all use more help in public speaking and how we represent ourselves online and personal branding. I'm sure every one of your listeners thinks about personal branding at least a couple times a year, if not more. In abstract, yes, this is a good thing. But we are talking about the no fun league here, right?
Yes.
And they are most likely to turn this into a homogenization of their players because that's what they've done across the board. I mean, everything at the NFL is this cookie cutter. We're all gridiron, heroes. And my fear is that they'll wipe out the uniqueness of the players to appeal to the homogeneity of the shield, and that will be a problem not just for the NFL and for marketers trying to work with some of these great players, but it's going to be a problem for the players who we have so many amazing different personalities in the NFL. To, one side is Kaepernick, who is being unfairly, kept from his craft because of what he's doing and being an individual, to, the folks like Bill Belichick, who never says anything and is just the hoodie. There's nothing wrong with that. The thing that I worry about this is that that they will try to turn everybody into these little robotic, like they use Transformers on, what is it, CBS, when they show NFL. Everybody becomes a Transformer and nobody becomes a person, and they just ruin the whole thing.
But at the same time, I mean, the players themselves, I mean, we're talking about people who have instantly become millionaires in some cases, who have no experience with being rich and have no experience with being a personality, have no experience with fame and fortune. And, a little guidance could help. I know, Jonathan, you have a firsthand experience with this, having worked with Mashburn Enterprises. I mean, Jamal Mashburn is a great example of someone who did well with his post-game career, but he's constantly being asked by people outside of that sphere for advice on how to get through these challenges.
Yeah, well, Jamal's been my partner now for almost 6 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you this right now: the NHL, the NBA, the NFL, MLB, they have one case study for all incoming athletes, and it's Jamal Mashburn. And the thing is Jamal will tell me horror stories about teammates that didn't know, millionaire teammates that didn't know how to wash their clothes, so they would throw them out. And they would come by to pick them up for an event, and they would answer the door in their underwear because they had no clothes. And I'm not exaggerating. This is a marketing show. I understand that. The problem is more in education of these guys and getting them smart enough and savvy enough before they create their brand. Now, if you guys remember, or if you guys even knew this, we did a TV show and it was called Falling Forward with Jamal Mashburn. And we talked to Mike Tyson, we talked to Allen Iverson, and guys like Allen Iverson, who is got his house foreclosed on, is living on his parents' couch right now, and is not allowed to see his 5 or 6 kids. And at the end of the conversation, he said, well, I know you guys own an energy drink. Just let me be the sponsor of it. And Jamal said, money, you're not listening to me. Money magnified your problems. These guys, the thing is that there's so many, it's such a complex situation, because did you know that every professional athlete gets double taxed for every state that they play in? So if I play for the Milwaukee Bucks and I have a game in Atlanta gets to double tax my income. So yes, you're making millions, but you're getting double taxed in every single state that you play in. The thing about it is that these athletes are ill prepared for life by the time they get to the NBA, because believe it or not, they've been getting greased since the time they were in middle school. These guys are getting paid in middle school. So if you're talking about creating a brand and stuff, you have to start with the education of the person and the human being that they are. And then you have to start to teach them about branding, because these contracts are nuts. I saw Jamal's contract when he played for the Miami Heat. I saw that contract, and it is so complicated that the average person isn't going to be able to make sense of it, let alone create their brand with the guidelines that contract is inflicting upon them.
You make so many good points. I mean, Jim.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, you do. You make a lot of great points about the situation. I mean, Jim, you have concerns about whether or not they would be homogenized, but these other concerns added in about, are they teaching them how to be, decent human beings who can function and actually cook a dinner for themselves? I mean, these are some basic needs that need to be addressed above and beyond whether or not they're good at being able to post on Instagram, right?
Absolutely. Look, there's nothing wrong with the boot camps they go through. It's actually, I think it's awesome to, do life lessons and learn from people who've come before and find mentors to help you out. That's not really that, to me, that can't even argue that. That's all very needed. What my concerns really circles around is the thing that we love about influencers and the thing that we love about creators who are really unique and themselves, and I'll use the A word, authentic, is that they are themselves and they speak personally to a group of people who can identify with who they are and what they've been through and what really makes them themselves. And the only worry I have is that, the NFL time and time again has been very much around trying to put everything into a box and to be very much the same. And I just worry that you'll take these wonderful personalities and turn them into just robots. And I
Vanilla,
would not want to see
probably,
that
right?
happen.
Vanilla. The one thing, two quick things, Bob. Number one, we keep talking about this. This is going to force me. We've got to get Jamal on the show because some of the stories that he has are outstanding. But the one thing that he told me that always resonated was, while he said while he was on the plane on the way to the next game, while everybody was talking about their conquests, he was reading a book, and Jamal started making more money off of his businesses while he was in the NBA. That's why he retired after 11 or 12 years. He retired because he was making more money outside of basketball. He owned and launched Outback. He owns 400 restaurants, Lexus dealerships. He diversified, and he wanted to make himself ready. He used basketball to carry a briefcase, not the reverse. And I think the thing is, what this all comes down to is education and understanding, and these people building their brands. If they know, be true to thyself, and if they know themselves, and if the professional leagues out there are going to help these guys and guide them, then that's what they have to do. They have to help them and guide them early.
Could not agree more. Absolutely.
I mean, I think at some point this is just about doing the right thing. On the one hand, it's hard to be concerned about athletes making the amount of money they make. On the other hand, there's a responsibility of these leagues to set them up for success. And it's also in everyone's best interest because, let's face it, all of the stories of bankrupt athletes who have made millions are not good for the leagues and not good for anyone. So, if this is about kind of not only educating, but helping instill a sense of, purpose and some kind of, sense of the impact of your actions in all of these athletes, and if they also are setting themselves up for success, then kind of everyone wins.
Well, I want to move on to the last topic of the evening, and it's kind of a fun one because Adweek put out a bunch of statistics. I forget where they got them, but the article's on the site. But they grabbed a bunch of statistics about the game, the big game, the Super Bowl that's coming up. We're recording before the game, so we don't know what happened, but this show will be released after the game has already been played. But some of these stats are really, really fun, Jonathan. Like, first of all, I love this one. Only 34% watch the game for the game. Only 34% of people are showing up to actually watch the Super Bowl for the game. They're watching it either for the commercials. Most people are watching it for the commercials or the halftime show.
Yeah, which shocked me. I wonder how accurate that is because back when I was with Prince, he was always complaining about the halftime shows, and then he did one. But he said, "I assure you, my mic will be on." So that pretty much was telling. But how accurate do you think that is? Because I think that aren't you kind of using that? Because whenever I've had Super Bowl parties, there's always a bunch of people behind me that are listening to music and dancing, and then the rest of us are watching the game. And it seemed like there were more people behind me. So are we including them in that category, in that statistic?
Oh yeah, but like people are very excited about the party. They're not excited about the
exactly.
game. It's just like even if you're into the NFL, Jim, I mean, you're not going to want to watch a game necessarily or be that invested in a game with a team from another city that really you have no connection with.
I don't know. I disagree. I think NFL fans, which I am proudly one, are going to watch the game because it's a good game. And the NFL, I believe, has moved beyond the other leagues to create a sense of wonder and a sense of wanting to watch teams that aren't even your favorite team because each game means so much and there's so much interesting stuff that happens that if you're an NFL fan, you'll watch. That's why Monday Night Football really works. It's why Sunday Night Football really works. And I have two things, though, that I think are on this data. First of all, 1 out of every 10 Americans calls in sick on the Monday after Super Bowl. That seems like a lot. Everyone. who's listening to count around your workforce and see if it's true, and then get back to Bob.
I
And tell us
know
if one out of every 10.
that statistic of 11% of the American workforce will call in sick the Monday after the game. That one like shocked me. I've never called in sick after the Super Bowl, but I guess this is a common occurrence.
I do like the idea of everybody calling Bob to report in. Okay, all right, so here's Bob's phone number, everybody.
Yeah, it's a data thing. Collect that data for us.
And then we're going to take your blood and your fingerprint.
By the way, the other thing that I love, and I don't know if you saw this or not, but TiVo's rolling out a feature called Game Skip, and it allows you, if you DVR the game, it skips the game and takes you right to the commercials. I love that.
That's as clever as it gets. You know, another stat that it really shocked me, Samir, was that we spend more on Super Bowl related purchases than we do on Halloween. And I thought Halloween was one of the more lucrative of all the holidays out there because people are spending so much on parties and costumes, etc. But no, we spend more on Super Bowl, $81 a head.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, if there's something that we know how to do in the U.S., it's create reasons to shop. Let's look at Black Friday and all the other things. But I think what a lot of these statistics are speaking to is, how much of a cultural moment the Super Bowl is and has become. And so in some ways, the fact that maybe a minority of people are watching the game really for the game is a testament to that fact and how much it is this sort of cultural moment. It's about people kind of coming together around this thing, people wanting to go to this party and spend it together. And so it's kind of astounding that we have that around sports, because I think
it is. And you know what, just to add to that, if we spend more on Super Bowl related purchases than Halloween, and having worked with Hershey's and Mars over the years, like up to 80% of their revenue for Mars and Hershey's is Halloween. So think about what kind of numbers we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's massive. Go ahead, Jim.
I'm also interested on the data if our kids dress up as Bill Belichick to scare people on Halloween, but then they reuse the costume on Super Bowl. Is that a Super Bowl expense or a Halloween expense?
Oh my God, my mind is blown.
And, by the way, I'm a diehard Patriots fan, so I can say that. Just saying.
I think the title of this show is Bill Belichick Scares Children. Well, another one that really got me, Jonathan, was 29% of us would reschedule our own wedding if our favorite team was in the game. I mean, that's pretty telling about what Jim was talking about that fandom, that rabid fandom of the NFL, that even though only 34% of the people are watching for the game, of those 34%, if your team is in there, you would reschedule your wedding to make sure you could watch this game.
Well, I would also add this statistic. 100% of Jonathan Sackett has never been married, and it's all because of football.
Hey, what I want to know is how many people schedule their wedding on Super Bowl weekend anyway?
I mean
wouldn't
come
that be
on, right?
It's one of those crazy questions that a surveyor adds in for no particular reason, so I'm not really going to take that too seriously. This last one is sobering, though, because we spend so much money on Super Bowl commercials, Samir. We go out of our way to spend, what is it up to now? $5-6 million for a 30-second spot. 43% of Americans don't plan on watching at all. Does that diminish the value of this as an ad unit?
Yeah, I think it does. But I also think that this kind of advertising, is no longer sustainable. Doing this sort of very large, top of mind awareness advertising on TV channels, let's face it, that is the ROI on that is in decline. And so you have to think about as marketers, so if we always measure things the way we did, which is going to be, Nielsen ratings and Ipsos surveys, and, your brand is known in the top 3 in your sector and so forth. What we're seeing now is that isn't necessarily translating into business outcomes. So just looking at things in the world of like kind of brand awareness and everything, which a lot of, these ads are about, I think is not going to be that effective going forward. And so it's a combination of thinking about, the standard things around the most effective channels and stuff, but also what are you trying to do when you actually get your message out there? Is it the same old stuff, or are you trying to maybe, drive a conversation or generate earned media or do something a bit different? I think these are the things marketers have to ask themselves rather than sticking to this thing we've always kind of done around big TV advertising.
Well, with that, it's time for the Ad Fail 5. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Jim Louderback. You can find him at vidcon.com. That's the home of that conference is it the biggest video influencer conference out there?
Yeah, we're the biggest event around online video in the world in the U.S., which happens in July, but we are bringing it to London in actually a week and a half. So from the 14th to the 17th of February, we'll be doing VidCon London. And the B2B side, our industry side, which is on Thursday and Friday, we'll focus on a lot of stuff we talked about here on influencer marketing, on GDPR and data protection, on VR and AR and immersive advertising, on new ways of monetization. So if you're listening to this in Europe, you should come to VidCon, and we'd love to host you there.
That's fantastic. I had no idea you were expanding to London. That's great news. Next up, speaking of London, Samir Patel. You can find him at bluestatedigital.com. That's where he is the Chief Innovation Officer. Tell us what's going on in your world, Samir. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, Blue State, we're thinking about all of these things across sectors. I think that's what's unique about us. We work with politics, we work with nonprofits, but we also work with big brands. And I think, really taking the customer view of things, we're helping a lot of organizations think about the societal context that we're facing right now. Things like I just talked about, the, decline of traditional marketing channels, but also the fact that people are not trusting organizations the way they used to and so forth. So yeah, we're an agency that really kind of puts people first and helps our clients take that viewpoint as well.
Yeah, I've been very impressed the more I've learned about Blue State, and both from where you came, your roots, and how you've evolved as an agency. Really, really great shop. Last but not least, we have Jonathan Sackett. You can find him at allscope.com or mashburnenterprises.com. Tell us what's going on in your world, Jonathan. What would you like to promote?
First and foremost, Bob has been a longstanding one of my closest friends, and I believe heavily in this show. I think you have great guests all the time. I think there's great people on here, and it's great content. So please share the show and support Bob. I love you, Bob.
Thank you.
Secondly, the All-Star Break is coming up, and the magazine of the All-Star Break is called Legends Magazine, and Jamal is on the cover of it. And I got one sentence in the article that mentions me, so look for that one sentence. Because basketball fans aren't going to give two craps about Jonathan Sackett, but that's okay. I got my name in the article. And finally, the last thing I would say is to follow me on Twitter. It's Jonathan Sackett with one H. You figure that out. Please follow me on Twitter.
It's meme-tastic to follow Jonathan Sackett on Twitter.
You never know what you're going to get.
As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me, and you can even find out how to advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for the Ad Fail 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, Quartz crunched some numbers regarding electric cars. And despite these vehicles certainly being our future, Samir, it becomes immediately obvious that all of the car makers have severely overestimated their demand. So word to the wise, wait for inventory liquidation sales, right?
Well, I mean, the other thing is, wait for some infrastructure to actually catch up. So I think that's probably part of the issue here. Electric cars just aren't that practical for a lot of people at the moment. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when you have car makers like Volvo who are claiming, that certain percentage of their fleet's going to be all electric. I just don't know if the demand and the infrastructure is there quite yet.
Yeah, the demand for cars is down. Period.
Yeah, exactly.
BOGO.
Now, next up, Mark Zuckerberg took to the Wall Street Journal last week to explain Facebook's position on all their recent struggles, Jim. But judging from the numerous snarky op-eds that have sprung up, you have to read Kara Swisher's. Oh, man, her takedown is great. It seems to have done little to further the company's case in the end. What's your take on this?
I think that this is going to be a bad year for Facebook. As I talked about earlier in the show, governments are going to be leaning in around the world. And when they lean into Facebook, they're not going to like what they see. So he needs PR help.
Yeah, I think he needs to stop going out there and doing these certain these interviews or these op-eds. They're not working for him. Well, next up, a bunch of the UK's top influencer celebrities got a rude wake-up call when they were threatened with jail time, Jonathan, if they didn't stop misleading the public with their shilling. These celebrities included the very famous pop singer Rita Ora. It's interesting how this all came down, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of the Kardashian effect, which I wish somebody would govern their mouths too. But it's funny because I heard this term, instead of celebrities, people were calling them celebratis, and I really liked that. I thought that totally makes sense.
Next up, we found out this past week that Facebook, another bad Facebook story, has been secretly paying teens $20 a month to set up data-sucking research VPNs that downloaded and analyzed all their phone activity. Samir, this doesn't seem like a good story to have out in the press right at this moment in Facebook's history.
Yeah, I mean, is any story about Facebook a good one to have out in the news? I mean, I think if we're surprised by anything Facebook is doing at this point, we're probably not plugged in. So yeah, kind of not surprised. And I think the question is, tied to the last one too, can governments do anything about this? Because right now they can't even get Facebook to show up to have a conversation in the room.
You know what? It's so funny because, the old adage of you don't know what you got till it's gone, for them is now you don't know what you took until you get it.
Good point. And this last one, for the group's enjoyment, McDonald's lost their right to the trademark Big Mac in the EU, leaving the door open to some amazing trolling, including the hilarious not Big Mac menu boards that Burger King Sweden installed in their restaurants. This one tickles me. I mean, it's just like, I don't understand why the EU didn't give them their trademark, Samir, but apparently it's turned out to be pretty problematic for them.
Yeah, I don't know. It's baffling. I mean, if we know of Big Macs in any other context, I'd love to hear about it. But, this just might be another case of the EU, just like they're doing with Google and others, just wanting to take a stand against big giant companies who make a lot of money in the EU.
Yeah, we're now going to do a Big Mac track at VidCon London, so stay tuned for that.
Well, you know what? I was going to say, I'll have a McWhoops with cheese. And so that there's going to be an attorney somewhere who is McUnemployed. So I don't know.
Good points. Well, have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it, comment online, use the hashtag AdFail5, that's pound, AdFail, and the number 5. Well, that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.